I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa, who's on our team, in just a minute. But I wanted to do a brief introduction of myself. I see a lot of familiar names and some that aren't, just to give you some sense of who I am and what Ligare is. So, and what spiritual direction has meant for me. I think that may be the most pertinent part of the conversation. So I've been in spiritual direction for maybe 25 years, and I'm an Episcopal priest. And part of the discernment process for that back in 2000 was to meet with the spiritual director for about a year and a half, which I did. And that prepared me for what was to come in that ministry and as parish clergy for the next 18 years or so. And then in 2016, I was part of a research study at Johns Hopkins and NYU, religious professionals and psilocybin. And that study should be released. It's been a long haul, but it should be released next January. That's what or this coming January, next month. So excited about that. But the topic for the day is spiritual direction. And I really believe that I had a profound experience at Hopkins with psilocybin. And I believe that the work I'd done as with spiritual direction and with spiritual direction prepared me for that experience. And I had a very profound experience in that ceremony at Hopkins. So, or in that research study at Hopkins. So I'm a big proponent. I'm in spiritual direction now, and I can't imagine I wouldn't be for the rest of my days. It's an important part of my monthly ritual with my spiritual director. And I early on, maybe right after I was in the study, I thought spiritual direction will be the equivalent of clinicians in the spiritual world, as opposed to therapists and trained people in the medical and psychiatric community. So I think there's definitely a parallel with that, and we'll hear a lot more about what spiritual direction is and what it isn't. But I just cannot say enough how important I think it is for both preparation and integration of these profound experiences. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Alyssa Jomay, who works closely with me and with the rest of the Ligare team to pull together groups like this. And she's doing an amazing job to pulling the spiritual directors group together. And why don't you pop in the chat room where you're coming in from? I think that's always fun to see. Somebody just did that, actually. So just as we're getting started, pop in where you're from, where you live, if you want to. It's up to you. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Hunt. Well, thank you all for being here today. It has been just one of the greatest honors and privileges to get to work with the community of spiritual directors that we've gathered here with the Ligare community. And today we've got two of our team. We've got Bonnie and Todd, who are going to be sharing with all of you in regards to the work we've been doing. Both Bonnie and Todd have been with me from the beginning. We were part of this very small group that got together and started discussing guidelines and ethical conduct for what is this cross-section of psychedelics and spiritual direction. So we've been traveling together for a year and a half or more now. And that then has evolved into a larger community of spiritual directors. We've got an advisory board, and we are getting ready to launch our newest project, which is going to be group spiritual direction. So this coming January, mid-January, early February, we're going to have several different time slots opening for group spiritual direction work. We will have groups of 4 to 6 seekers gathering together with one of our spiritual directors to explore topics related to psychedelics, mysticism, and anything that comes up. And as we've been gathering together, we continue to have the discussion. A lot of people still don't know what spiritual direction is, and let alone group spiritual direction. So we decided to have these open houses to share a little bit more broadly with our community about this ministry. I myself am an interfaith spiritual director, and my path to spiritual direction training and my path working with my own spiritual director has been absolutely transformative and so supportive of integration and preparation work. So I am beyond delighted to get to share this with all of you and the larger public. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Todd and let him introduce himself, and then we'll move to Bonnie, and you can hear from both of our directors.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Hunt. And good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, or good morning, or wherever you are. Welcome to this conversation. And I see where to begin. I was involved working with an evangelical college campus ministry for 23 years. That was a significant part of my adult life and adult work. I was a campus minister. And one of the most defining experiences for me personally in those 23 years was struggling with anxiety and with depression. And eventually, my struggles with anxiety and depression caused me to expand kind of my spiritual search in some ways. And I was introduced to the Franciscan priest Richard Rohr, who began to have a profound impact on my life and my spiritual journey, and really introduced me to a more open and contemplative spirituality, which I really clung to because the resources and the tools that I had through my evangelical background were just not as helpful as I needed them to be in my struggle with anxiety and depression. And so contemplative spirituality, centering prayer, really became an anchor for me and ultimately began to really change my worldview, expand my understanding of what it meant to be a Christian, to be a spiritual person on this planet. And it led me into many new avenues of exploration in my spiritual journey. Left that ministry about 8 years ago. And that's when I became a spiritual director. In many ways, becoming a spiritual director had overlap with my college campus ministry days, and that I loved sitting with people who were exploring deep questions of faith and spirituality and what it meant to be a Christian, what it meant to be a follower of Jesus, or what it meant to be spiritual, but not necessarily of a particular faith background or tradition, or from different faith backgrounds and traditions. And so as a spiritual director, I get to sit in that space with people. I get to hold space for people to have a safe container to explore their spiritual journey, their relationship with God, their relationship with themselves, and things like that. And I absolutely love that. And then about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I was introduced to, I'd been learning about psychedelics as a treatment for anxiety and depression, and got reconnected with an old friend of mine, and who happened to be training as a guide. And I started working with mushrooms and some of the other psychedelics in ceremonial fashion just over 2 years ago, primarily to help heal and transform my inner world and my journey with anxiety and depression, to give me some relief from that, but also to use it to use my anxiety and depression as a means of transformation spiritually. And so I got involved in psychedelics as a result of that. What I found, though, is that my experiences with the psychedelics lined up beautifully with my contemplative Christian spirituality. Like there was no separation, no difference. Like it was all about experiencing union with God and becoming a whole person. And so I found psychedelics and contemplative spirituality to just really fit well together, and have been a profound part of my journey, not only my healing journey psychologically and in mental health issues, but also a profound boost and a profound catalyst in my spiritual journey as well. So that's what brought me here to today. A little over a year and a half ago was when I got connected to Hunt Priest through a retreat that Ligare was a part of. And Hunt kept talking about spiritual directors being vital to the reintroduction of psychedelics, or the introduction of psychedelics into the church and the church realm. And I was eager to be part of that process of helping Ligare expand their ministry with this, but also to see the different ways that psychedelics can really be a benefit to people on a spiritual journey and people in the Christian tradition. So, and that's brought me here today.
Thank you so much, Todd, for sharing. And Bonnie, will hand it over to you.
Thank you all. And I want to thank you all for leaning into this invitation. Whether you know why you're here or not, it doesn't really matter. You're here. And a little bit of my background is in my previous career, I was a pediatric neuropsychologist. I did that for many years, and I retired from that to become a stay-at-home daughter to take care of my dad for 10 years. And when he finally transitioned, I thought my life was over. I didn't know what I was going to do. I discovered spiritual direction through a friend, and I decided shortly after that that maybe this was my calling. And I tested it out on friends. Does this sound like me? Could I do this? And I found that this work just absolutely gave my life meaning and purpose. It colored everything in it. I can't imagine not doing this and being a part of it. It allowed my Roman Catholicism, which I was struggling with, so I now consider myself a recovering Catholic, but it broadened my belief. It brought the 3 dimension of Jesus into my heart. It allowed it to be a vocabulary that wasn't restricted by religion. And also by this work, I am allowed and I am humbly honored to listen others into self-discovery. It is an absolute, until you've experienced it, you have no idea what it's about, but it is a tender heart that you own, that is an intimate relationship with God, and someone is feeling and listening to you and just compassionately holding all of that space, and you are brought into light and wonderment. And no matter where you are in that particular journey, you are being listened to in the pain, in the horrors, in the everyday life, in your meditation, in your ceremonies, in every part of and every breath. So I am adamantly saying everybody should be in spiritual direction. It is not your best friend. It is not a prayer group. It is not a book group. You're not going to have coffee with your BFF once a month, but it is someone who you will find absolutely is with you all the way in everything, no matter what. I hope we can have a further discussion about exactly what that is and what people are looking for. And I hope I can answer those questions for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. I actually think that would be a great segue, kind of discussing some of the things that spiritual direction is and some of the things spiritual direction is not. Would either of you like to start touching on some of the keystones of that?
Todd, do you want to?
Sure, as soon as I can figure out how to unmute myself here. And I think I've done this before, but a little tricky today. Yes. Lots of different metaphors and images for spiritual direction that can be helpful. One of them is like hoisting a sail on a sailboat and letting the wind take you. And a spiritual director is a companion with you on the boat to help you discern which way the wind is blowing and which way you are being led in your life. And so that's an image and a metaphor that I find helpful. For me personally, I like to talk about it as spiritual direction is, and a spiritual director is someone who can help create a safe container for you to explore your relationship with the divine, to safely ask any questions that may not feel safe to ask in other settings. Really, any question is a safe question in spiritual direction. And so it's creating a container for you to be completely honest and vulnerable as much as you're able to be and want to be with someone who will be with you in that space in a non-judgmental, attentive, compassionate, and curious way. And so it really is someone who can sit with you in the depths of your pain, the heights of your ecstasy, and all of the mundane life that comes in between that really become the material for our spiritual transformation and growth. And so it really is creating a safe container for you or whomever in that space to explore whatever it is that is wanting to and needing to be explored. So I'll start with that.
Dovetailing on that too, I see this as probably one of the most intimate relationships you can possibly have. It's something that has no words many oftentimes in our lives when we're trying to explain what happens with divine mystery, God, sacredness, whatever word you want to use for that. But the spiritual direction process, it can lead you into a deeper intimacy with that sacredness. It's your true self that comes forward for others. It promotes gratitude. It necessitates discernment. It evokes love. It's a hinge. It's a hinge upon being attentive to the moment. We have a history, we have a future, but the sacred lives right here in the now, in this very moment. And that's what we're invited to share. And that's where we connect with whatever we call our divine, with our community of closeness, with our greater community of the world, how that involves with your work, with your friends, how you get up and put your lens on through the day. You know, I wear glasses, so I always talk about the lens that I look through because I can't see a darn thing when I get up in the morning. So I decide in the morning, what's my intention that I'm going to be looking for? And it's that listening heart, and it's that gentle stirring that within that just brings you deeper and allows you to hold on to that and just bring you closer, not just to the other, but to self.
We've talked around this, but I also want to more specifically say, I think that for me, spiritual direction and the spiritual journey, and especially in the contemplative stream, it's all about love. It's about helping you connect into your true self, into the love that lives in the center of your being, so that you can experience that love for yourself and let that love flow through you and out of you into the world, into those around you, to your family, your friends, your loved ones, your community. And so spiritual direction is a space for you to help get tapped into that love that lives in you at the center of your being. A couple other images and metaphors that I really like. One is an idea of a spiritual midwife or a spiritual doula, or a true self midwife or true self doula to help you give birth. We don't give birth for you. You have to do the work. You have to be the one to give birth. But what you're giving birth to is your deepest and truest self. Allow your soul to come forward and allow all the filters and all the screens and all the masks and personas that we put on to shield and hide our true self, which we needed to do to stay safe in the world. That's understandable. But in spiritual direction, you get to begin to peel those back and to give birth to your deepest and truest self, which is rooted absolutely in love.
And also, I'd like to add the connection between ceremony and spiritual direction. Lots of times people get involved in a ceremony. They do a little bit of work in the beginning. You have a little bit of integration at the end, and then they think that's it. The integration can go on for months and months, and you need someone to process that with you. You need a hearing, listening heart that knows your heart to say that back. It's not just a singular experience. It is integrating that into yourself. It's integrating it into your relationships, particularly relationship with God. So you want that unioning. You don't want it to be a parallel play. You want it to be unioning. And I think that's why particularly I'm very adamant in this particular work to see that. Working with trauma, I'm also an end-of-life doula, and seeing how all of these little dots are so connected to the universe, and how it is so important for us to understand that for each thing we walk through, that we are not walking alone in that.
I love that. Yes. I think that a few things that you've touched on, both of you, is one, creating this container. And it's not only creating and holding this container, but it really, for me, it's this process of stretching the container I was in too. It's like kind of growing into my spirituality. And then also this meaning making, and these spiritual direction relationships, they're not short term, they're oftentimes very long term. I think you've heard from some of us meeting with our directors for years, decades even, and they're very long term relationships to get to know each other's hearts and really have this safe place to explore. And another thing you touched on too is that, this idea of our spirituality, a lot of times it's we go to church or we go to wherever the sacred place is to experience it, but through spiritual direction it's really brought a sacredness to everyday life. Like all the relationships, all the work, everything that we're doing becomes a part of our spiritual life. So thank you both for that. And Hunt, I'm curious if you've got any reflections on any of this.
Well, I want just real quickly, because I think as we're talking about what this is and isn't, sometimes people say, well, I have a pastor or a priest. Why would I need to do this? Or I've got a therapist. And, but I was, as a parish priest and somebody that's trained in that vocation and ministry, it's a different set of certainly skills and a different set of training. Parish, and there are wonderful spiritual directors who are also parish clergy. So it's not about one role or the other, but it's about a certain kind of disposition and a way of appearing in the world. I don't think I'd be a very good spiritual director, honestly. And my training is more in liturgy and in pastoral care. I think if you're in a serious crisis in the hospital, you probably want your parish priest or pastor to come. You certainly want to talk to your spiritual director, but it's not, no one is everything. And I think sometimes we often make clergy, that's our only spiritual guide. And first of all, most parish clergy don't have time to meet with people once a month. We shouldn't do that because it does kind of sometimes go into therapy. So I know at least in the Episcopal Church, I think it's 6 times meeting and on an issue, and then you have to refer people. I've often referred people to spiritual directors and therapists, but depending on what the situation is, I've often referred people to spiritual directors. So just realizing that every situation has a different set of skills and a different kind of role. So if you're active in your church and you have a pastor, wonderful, but this can really deepen your own walk with Christ and your own spirituality. It's not the same thing. So that's it. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. There's a comment in the box which I think can help guide our conversation here. Betsy says, I'm guessing many of us are familiar with spiritual direction, but are keenly interested in your specific plans for group spiritual direction and how you see this preparing us for the psychedelic renaissance. If time allows, I would like to hear more about what you are hoping to achieve with these new groups. That's a great, great question. Would either of you like to start on, you've been here since the beginning, and just kind of your general feelings about what we want these groups to be and the purpose of having these groups?
Quickly, I guess I'll let Todd can probably, he's better at this than I am probably, but we came up with the idea with it being an introduction to not only what spiritual direction is, but how it is married to ceremonies, because there is spiritual direction out there, but it's not usually talked about within these circles. So we wanted to make our own safe container, a place that would have the gifts that we bring, the joys and gifts you bring, but allowing some of that. It could be about a ceremony, or maybe it wouldn't be about, but it broadens the dialogue. It broadens the perspective of where God is in that. So it isn't strictly in a swim lane of religion, but more how we have crossed those lines and made spirituality beyond the lines of religion, but of incorporating that in your everyday, so that it's part of the conversation instead of being an asterisk or a quiet little conversation that you have with a friend or something. Todd, would you like to add to that, please?
Yeah, that was well said, Bonnie. Thank you. And I would just add too that we talk about this, one of the descriptors we use is psychedelic informed spiritual direction. So it's people who are familiar with psychedelic ceremonies, who are familiar with the work, who more than likely have well, I think we've said they have to have had their own experiences in this ceremonial world. And so they bring a wealth of experience in the ceremonial realm along with their spiritual direction starting point or standing vantage point, is what I want to say. And so there's a lot that goes into the ceremonial work, right? It's important to do good preparation, to have a sense of what your intentions are going into a ceremony and what your fears might be, what your concerns might be. And so preparation is a very important part of doing ceremonial work to get the set and setting kind of dialed in. And spiritual direction can be a beautiful place to help you do that. And then on the other side of it, as Bonnie and Alyssa, I think, both mentioned, is this idea of integration. And I've heard it said that integration is 50% of the journey work, 25%, of the ceremonial work, 25% of the work is preparation, 25% is the ceremony itself, and then the rest, the other 50% is this integration work. So how do we make meaning of these profound experiences that we're having in this space? And to have a community who is also on a similar journey and asking similar questions adds so much value, and it helps shape the meaning from your own journey experience, from your own ceremonial experience, to listen to others talk about their meaning-making experience also. And so our hope is to create a space. The spiritual direction kind of the big container that we were just talking about, but to bring in the psychedelic ceremonial piece to it as well, and allow for people to have the kinds of conversations that I think they're wanting to have and can really benefit from in this kind of work.
And to dovetail that a little bit too, the fact of doing it in a group builds that a necessary community, a very safe place to feel that you can come with others who are sharing the experience that you have in a regular integration. But it is so much more as you unpack it and unpack it and unpack it. It's those concentric circles, the stone of the ceremony, and then those concentric circles going out just speak so much more to all of us. And in a group setting, we learn and we experience from others as well.
Absolutely. And there really seems to be something kind of magical that happens in group spiritual direction. It's just this interplay between threads that we get to experience together and kind of look at from different lenses as we hear somebody else speak on their own experiences of their spiritual unfolding. So I think you've touched on that key piece of one, a deep rooted community. And that's something I think a lot of us, we have gotten so far away from culturally. So that piece, and then touching on, we had initially had our conversations about wanting integration groups and integration circles, and we ended up going with the format of group spiritual direction very intentionally. And I think one of the great pieces of this is we've got our larger community at Ligare. We've got people who have had experiences, going on for many, many years, all the way to people who are just curious and starting to explore what this area is all about. And no matter where you're at on your path, you can come into one of these circles, and there's a place to kind of digest and get really curious about that. And the shared parts of that really helps everybody in a really unique way. And you also get to work on both the preparation phases as well as integration. It kind of almost becomes inseparable in some ways. But if I haven't had a journey, or I'm planning to have some sort of ceremony, people can start to learn skills and tools to help integrate and prepare themselves for that.
I think Todd, I'm sorry, I just stepped on you.
No, that's great.
Oh, I think Todd started saying that it's not sitting around having a cup of coffee conversation. There's great structure to this. There is intentional listening. There is what we call active listening, in the sense of listening without like, oh, what am I going to say? It's not somebody giving a comment about what you said. It's somebody just holding that again in that larger vessel. And
Mhm.
the power of that cannot be explained. It has to be experienced, but it is clearly not just sitting around like, well, I did this and this happened here, blah, blah, blah. That's not what any of this is about. It's holding that very tenderly and doing it over Zoom. I would be the first one to say, never gonna work. Pandemic made me a believer. The director is able to hold that sacred space, build that container, and invite others into it gently. And it is a beautiful, sacred space.
Absolutely. There's some questions regarding what certification processes look like, and I'll just touch on that briefly. Here in the United States, it is so vast, the different programs and formation programs. One resource that we can probably drop here in the chat box, but Spiritual Directors International is kind of the hubcap for all things spiritual direction. And that's a global organization. If you are curious about finding out more about spiritual direction and training programs, that might be a good place to start. We are, from what I understand, the kind of the first that are working on this psychedelic informed spiritual direction aspect of spiritual direction. So I'm also going to drop my email in the box. And if you are currently a spiritual director and have questions about getting a little bit more involved, feel free to reach out here as well.
Can I jump in here, Alyssa?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll say most spiritual direction training programs, they're at least a year, and they really need to be probably 3 years, but often they're somewhere between 1 and 3 years. And I live in Fresno, California, and I've led a couple spiritual direction training cohorts here in Fresno, and they've been 2-year cohorts. But even that is not enough to really prepare someone to be a spiritual director. You need kind of that ongoing supervision. You need ongoing connection with the community to help you become that. But it is different from being a therapist or being a chaplain. Like, there is no licensing board. Like, there's no license to be revoked for a spiritual director because there's no one licensing you. And when people complete my program, I give them a certificate of completion, saying they've completed the program. I don't certify them as a spiritual director. So it's a bit different in that regard, and there's some real benefits to that. There can be some dangers too, so you just want to be careful to kind of vet someone who is presenting themselves to you as a possible spiritual director. And of course, the relationships are always they're voluntary, right? So if you work with someone for a couple sessions and it just doesn't seem to fit, you're welcome to leave and find someone else. So there is a different nature to it, and I think it can be helpful to understand that. But it is helpful to have some training, because
Oh yeah.
there are just certain pieces you need to know and understand. But the person who trained me, or the group that trained me, talked about how spiritual direction is more caught than taught. So you can get all the training in the world to be spiritual director, but that's not going to make you a great spiritual director. Like, you have to do the inner work, and you have to be experiencing transformation yourself to get to a place where you can really serve others in the role as a spiritual director.
And I piggybacking on that, some of the other spiritual direction, you go through your multi-year, usually, training program. But a part of that is you continue even after you finish, that you work with your own spiritual director regularly, and are also with a mentor or a peer supervision group. So there's this really continued process of staying in community and continuing to deepen and enrich in your own spiritual life. So it doesn't kind of just end there. And you kind of, there's a weird way you feel like you're called to it, and then it's not really anything like you expect. It's just so much more, and it's really, really deep process in and of its own. There is a question in the chat box. Let me get back here, but wondering if either of you would mind speaking on your own spiritual experiences with psychedelics or mystical experiences, and how that's changed the work you do as a spiritual director.
Todd, do you want me to go?
Go ahead, Bonnie.
I find it doesn't change any. Let me phrase that. I've been very involved in spiritual direction for a long time with myself, and for the last 15 years as a spiritual director. I found the use of psychedelics not to change something, but I found it as if you think of it as you're the soil, and the soil can be a little dense. And psychedelics, my experience is it loosens that soil. It loosens it to allow growth, nourishment to come in, those nutrients, whether they are from the ceremony or something that was within that I didn't know was there, and it became obvious then to me. It was an invitation to go deeper. It didn't give me an answer saying, I want this, and drop it down. I hate to say it. Well, for me, it doesn't work that way. It is something that said, oh, here's if you're at a fork in a road, try this way. It gives you a sense of opening up something that I didn't know was possible. It wasn't like I was Catholic on Friday and Sunday I was something else. It's not that type of connection, but it allows you to go deeper. It allows you to find your true self. It allows you to find a deeper connection with God, whatever that looks like, that I didn't know was possible until this unearthing occurred. And as I said, I can only speak from my own personal experience.
Great, Bonnie. And I think I would be willing to give, or I would give, a very similar answer to my experience with centering prayer and with my contemplative spiritual practices. They really are about kind of breaking up the hard soil within so that my true self can come forward, so that the love that lives in me already, can come forward. And that's why I've been practicing centering prayer for 15 years or whatever it's been, 20 years. And it's why I have other contemplative spiritual practices. It's to help me get my egoic self, my small self, out of the way, so that my true self, so that love can come forward. And psychedelics are just another resource, another tool to help me do that work. And they've given me some very profound experiences of union with the divine, union with God, union with source, whatever you want to call it. They've given me some very profound experiences of that help to deepen my other contemplative work. It deepens my centering prayer practice, and it allows me to continue going deeper. It's just another tool in my toolbox to help me on my spiritual journey. And it just, like we said, it dovetails really well with all the other contemplative practices I have in my toolbox.
And with that deepening love that Todd talks about too, the fact that it is an ongoing integration, it's not a one and done, that it fine tunes that experience to become much more intimate and much more personalized. And I find for myself too that it strengthens what I thought I knew, or what I thought I wanted to know, or I wanted to hold, and I was afraid to. And that then gave me that opportunity to say, yes, this is of God. This is for you. This is something that you can walk with. Yeah. So it as Todd said, it isn't a one or other. It's that beautiful melding. Like, why wouldn't you want more stuff in your toolbox? Like it's just beautiful. And it's not, and I don't think Todd and I are saying it's easy. It's hard work. You have to do it, and you really have to commit to doing this work. And sometimes you're just sitting in the muck for a really long period of time. And that's when it's really nice to have a spiritual director that says, I'll sit in the muck with you for a little while.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I will say one more thing too, if I can, Alyssa. So if you're familiar with the Enneagram, I'm in Enneagram 6. So that means kind of the root of my egoic structure is fear. The fear of being without support, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of being alone, or even not existing at all. And what my psychedelic experiences have done have helped me to begin making friends with that fear inside, and helping me release that fear from my body. Like like literally, fear is like rooted in every cell in my body. And when I work with psychedelics, psychedelics are helping my, not just my mind, but my spirit and my body to release this fear that has become my prison, the fear that is the source of both my anxiety and my depression. And the psychedelics are helping me to release that from my body, mind, spirit, and soul. And so, in ways that my other contemplative practices have helped to do, but psychedelics have allowed me to go much further and deeper, much faster.
Yeah, I think something that the psychedelics really, that this gift of this embodied sense of the divine. I think that I've heard many people talk about, a lot of us felt like spiritual people. We had rigorous practices, and you go into a space like with a medicine space, and it kind of just shatters the glass ceiling of your beliefs in a way you just had no idea how big God could be. And then you also just feel God so deeply in every cell of your body. And that is, I mean, for me, that's, if you haven't felt God like that, it can just shift everything so tremendously. And that integrates into all those aspects of life that we've been talking about. And I saw somebody in there asking about the use of this word ceremony, and what that's referring to is medicine space. Maybe going into active medicine space. And I want to just clarify that the group spiritual direction is not something that in medicine space is going to be explored together, but this is to kind of support the further integration or preparation for those that are interested in this tool within their greater toolbox. And exploring together, I think something that's been really alive for me is I culturally just feel like we had little access to some of the contemplative tools, like some of these other tools that so deeply support our practice. And I find that in group spiritual direction, there's access to learning about different modalities and tools to utilize alongside of psychedelics or other parts of your practice. Want to add those in. And feel free to, if you've got any questions, you're welcome to raise your hand, continue to write them in the chat box. I do have one here that says, what would you say the difference between spiritual integration guide and a spiritual director is? It's a great question.
Vocabulary. It's pretty much,
I would
you can label it all kinds. I mean, we've just had this discussion, like a spiritual director. You do absolutely no directing. It's a long story of how that word came. But it can be a companion, it can be your journey buddy, it can be whatever you want to call it. It's just, that's the word, that's the phrase that has been used through time. And it also, it's not a level playing field. It's not like we're going to be best buds. It's I am listening to you. It's all about you. You get to be you 100%, and I leave out of it. I am the skin in the room, but it is God and spirit that is speaking through me to you. I'm not channeling. No, we don't want to go down that road. But it's the idea that I am open to what I am hearing you say that God is saying. I am repeating back. I am helping you listen, because God's inside. It's not like you got to call the God down. Everything is inside of you. It's unpacking that, opening it up, listening, daring to participate in it. So don't get caught in the vocabulary of, well, should I see a director? Should I see a companion? It's sometimes the program of what they're called. That's, I hope that answered that.
Yeah, and I haven't.
Go ahead, Todd.
Sorry,
well, I'd say there's a little on the term integration. I think really does, with that specific question, there's a focus on this integration of a particular experience. And I find that spiritual direction is kind of an expanded container. There's room for all different things. So it doesn't even have to, like, I envision that these spiritual direction groups, there may be people that come who have not had experiences, or maybe are just curious about some other part of their practice, but it's kind of an edgier part or a part that they haven't yet explored with anybody else. So there's a lot of space in a spiritual direction container, and like no walls, maybe even.
Yeah.
Sorry, I misinterpreted.
No, you did good. We had, no, it's very true though, with all these different labels.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know that I'm not too familiar with very many folks who would consider themselves a specific integration guide. And so, same as what I was saying before, though, I think you just vet the person, have an introductory conversation, ask them why they do what they do, ask them how they do it, and get a feel for what it feels like. It may be that they feel just like a spiritual director. It may be that they feel more like an integration coach, where they're going to be more directive and more specific for you into what to do and how to integrate it, which that may be exactly what you need. So you're going to have to kind of feel your way into this space and check out the people that you're interested in working with and see what it feels like and make your decision based on that. So there really is a lot of autonomy and the need for a lot of discernment kind of in finding these people, especially as so much of this is new on the psychedelic side. It's a very new field in terms of what's happening right now, even though psychedelics have been around for so long. But what's happening now is new. And so, yeah, just use your wisdom, use your intuition, and be very discerning. And I think you'll be okay.
And I think that's how Todd and the rest of us started doing this, was that we wanted it to be people who really had some handle on what was going on, as opposed to somebody that read an article in the back of Rolling Stone magazine, and you have to be careful.
Yeah. And I think that's something that as we came together as a group, is we were all involved in the larger spiritual direction communities, but we realized that we had these seekers coming to us with these experiences, and we had questions ourselves, and we didn't really have a spot to go digest that. And so that's, we're kind of we're evolving together.
And I think
but I see a comment here. Oh, go right ahead, Todd.
I was going to say, I think this speaks to an earlier question. I'm not sure if it was addressed, but we did have a conversation, and we did decide that we wanted this circle of spiritual directors to be people who've had direct experience working with psychedelics. And so there's space for people who haven't worked with psychedelics to provide support in this, but I think for us, it felt important to be people who've had these kinds of experiences themselves, along with their spiritual direction training experience, to combine those three, those elements together to offer what we're offering here through Ligare and these group spiritual direction opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you for touching back around to that. I see Hunt made a comment in here just regarding spiritual direction, that this ministry goes back to the earliest days of Christianity, the desert mothers and fathers. People went out to be with them, to go deeper. Here we've got, scroll back up to this. It sounds to me that before a person considers becoming a spiritual director, they should probably be participating in it. That is, meet with their own spiritual director, perhaps for quite some time. Can you speak to this?
I know most programs you have to be in spiritual direction, and some do have a number of years attached to that requirement.
Yeah, it only makes sense that if you're feeling called to this and you're feeling called to this kind of ministry and want to do it, that you're getting lots of experience with it yourself. So, yeah.
And there is a quite a vetting process to many programs. There's referrals, it isn't just calling up and signing up, and so it's deep work.
There's questions Can you talk about how ceremonies come about and unfold, and does Ligare host these? So there's not any current ceremonies that are offered through Ligare. A lot of times this is done out of the country for people just because of legal reasons. We do, though, depending on where you're located in the country, different states have they're in different processes with decriminalization and legalization steps. So I'll throw out here another thing that Ligare has been doing is creating and developing regional communities. And these regional groups are a lovely way to get connected to the Ligare people with similar interests. And through those communities, you might find resources that are more localized to your region. So if you have interest in that, feel free to reach out to Hunt or myself, and we'll get you connected and find what resources we have for that. There's also a question regarding the cost and how to get signed up for these groups. So those of you that are registered on yesterday's open house or today's open house are going to have first access for signing up for this. And there will be a cost associated with it. And we will have a spiritual director that we are essentially contracting with. So they're not Ligare employees, but they are vetted through our group, trusted directors. And these groups will be meeting once a month for 2 hours. Again, there'll be 4 to 6 individuals, and it'll be the same group that travels together for a 6-month period. And so that's a little bit more on that. And there will be an email going out to all of you first for signing up with the time slots that we've got starting in January, February.
And also the importance of it being a 6-month process, that it isn't a drop in, that you are building community. And it is so imperative that that group stay as a solid group within that time. So that's why that particular block was discussed, and we came up with that 6-month period.
And we don't have the exact cost right now. What we're doing is working to figure out all the finalize the logistics, but that'll be coming out with the registration within the next week or two to all of you. And then after a time period, we'll release that to the larger community. And for those of you that haven't seen, we've got another one of our directors, Annette Kay, who is based out of Europe, and that community they're not Ligare specific, but it's a kind of similar to our regional communities because there's more access to legal use of these medicines or these substances. They have been working to organize in the Netherlands retreats and whatnot, so that might be a point of contact. And again, if you reach out, we can help find the right people to connect you to based on where you're located. Then see Hunt here. We are looking to start more local groups. Right now, it's a matter of human resources, a very, very small staff, but we plan to expand in 2024. So if you connect with us, or if there's not a regional group out where you are and you have interest in helping develop that is something we can help support as well. Small conversations, that's where everything began for the regional groups that we currently have. And I absolutely love the regional groups and love watching them grow. It's really a nice way to get a little bit more intimately connected. And I've been surprised at just the vastness of people that come to the groups and the skills and gifts that they all show up with, and the way it all magically works together. And you always seem to find the right person or the person you're needing to talk to. So with that, I want to make sure I haven't missed any other questions. If I've missed something that you're eager to have answered, please unmute yourself or raise your hand. The chat box, we tried to keep up with it best we could. I don't want to skip anything.
I will say too, someone's asking about the group Spiritual Direction. That's open to anyone. And in fact, you don't even need to be working with psychedelics to be part of the group Spiritual Direction. Although there will likely be people in the group who are processing their experiences with psychedelics as part of their spiritual direction, but you don't need to be working with psychedelics to be in this group Spiritual Direction. They're open to anyone who wants this kind of container to help explore their spiritual journey.
Yeah, you need a curiosity and a wonderment.
Wonderful. And I saw somebody asking about an Oregon group. We actually do have a group out in Oregon already. So I'm going to drop my email again here in case it got lost. Please feel free to email me and I will get you connected. Fabulous little group down there. We've got quite a lot of activity. I'm out here in Washington State and the Pacific Northwest. We've got a lot going on out here. So. All right. Well, with that, Hunt, would you mind closing us out with a little prayer?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, I want to thank the three of you, well, everyone for coming and asking great questions, three of you for taking an hour to share the ministry and all this intersect. This is an exciting development, I think, in what we're doing and really important. And I think it's just set to expand pretty significantly. So the interest in this has already been big, and it was barely, we just started talking about it. So thank everyone for your interest, and just watch our newsletter. And this group, we did another one of these yesterday, and then this one today. So you all get the first round of promotions or an email, and then to sign up. But it's going to expand. I would say by sometime next year we'll have multiple groups. We're just trying to roll it out. Eventually we'll have a referral list for individual spiritual directors. Just like I said, we got a small staff, and we want to try to do this with some method to our madness. So yeah. So, but again, thank you all for coming and for your interest and for just being willing to step out and be identified as a religious, spiritual Christian person and somebody interested in the healing that can come with psychedelics and the spiritual growth and development. So we're on the threshold of something very important and big, and wonderful bunch of colleagues, including everyone on this call. I think our newsletter has maybe about 1,600 participants now. It's growing really quickly now, which is a sign to me that there's a lot of interest. So stay tuned to that. So let me offer a blessing for as we go. If we're in the East, we're about to go to dinner. If we're in the UK, which a few people are, you're about to go to bed. If you're in California, you still got a few more hours left in the day. So I'll offer a blessing for us as we make our way out. Life is short, and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those we travel with. So be quick to love and make haste to be kind. And the blessing of God, who creates and sustains all that there is, be upon you and all those you love this day and always. Amen. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This was beautiful.
Yeah,
Absolutely wonderful.
See y'all again.
All right.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.